Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I'll be discussing the one standalone novel done in conjunction with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles TV series in the early 1990s. Now, I've covered the tie-in books in terms of what was done for the kids or children's market, starting with the wonderful Random House series that predated the Young Indy TV series and then basically picked back up and added some allusions and connections to the Young Indy TV series, but the Random House books still really exist in their own universe and is still relatively canon, and I think actually the best overall Young Indy mixture of educating kids about history, but giving the requisite pulp flavor of an adventure serial just aimed at more of a youth market. Whereas the other books and tie-ins for the series were pretty much directly adapting episodes. There were tie-in comic adaptations, tie-in children's books, and specifically the tie-in Choose Your Own Adventure books, which I've got some behind me here, which I've discussed in other videos, where they basically took various episodes of the television series and just did a basic Choose Your Own Adventure book out of them. But they didn't really change all that much or provide enough negative outcomes for the reader in terms of really making the Choose Your Own Adventure inventive. They are very much as is basic adaptations, and it doesn't allow much wiggle room to do anything other than exactly what happened in the episode. Now, when discussing Young Indy at all, you have to look at the approach of the Chronicles TV series and what the goal was, which was essentially to place young Indiana Jones at different points in his life in and amongst as much historical events as Lucasfilm could possibly do, and also have Indy meet virtually every historical figure that existed up until the point of the start of the film timeline in 1935 with Temple of Doom. So the focus of the series was not merely entertainment, it was supposed to be an educational focus, and that's led to it getting the term of edutainment, where those two elements are blended together. I should say the attempt was made to blend them together, and the results are unfortunately rather mixed. The show has amazing production values for the time and is, I think, very underrated. I don't think it really ever fully reached its audience, and it didn't do itself any favors with the broadcasting schedule and being a show that was done out of sequence in terms of the episodes would vary between the young Indy played by Corey Carrier, who was literally a young boy, and so that limited the plots that you could do with a kid who's less than 10 years old. And then you have the more famous and well-received episodes starring the older Indy played by Sean Patrick Flannery. This is where you get the World War I episodes and the shows with the more dramatic meat to their stories, because you can do a lot more. And when Indiana Jones was at that age during the war years, especially in 1916, there's many places you can take Indiana Jones, and every story you try to tell is going to contribute greatly to his character makeup and basically get us one step closer to the Indy we first met in Raiders of the Lost Ark. To complicate matters further, the series was ended prematurely and then kind of bounced around and culminated in a series of extended runtime shows, more like TV movies. And then when it came to the video releases, the episodes started being brought together and expanded into miniature movies, sometimes with little bits of bridging material added, but they would also remove scenes, change the edits, sometimes tweak a few other things here and there in order to make them more of a consistent 90-minute movie experience. But originally they were separate episodes, and they also removed the bookends for every episode with the old Indy character who would introduce and conclude each episode, which was basically Indiana Jones remembering something that had happened to him, and anything in the world could prompt Old Man Indy to say, "I remember when I had this happened and I met these 15 other world famous figures," and then it would conclude with the old man having either bored everyone or imparting some sort of life lesson. That was basically the first thing to go and the major casualty of combining the episodes. So at present, the only way you can actually see the series in the original episode form with the original old Indy bookends is to look at fan preservations, which I think are very helpful to understand what the show was originally like and also what the experience of watching the show from week to week was like. I do think the original episode formats are better than the extended combined movie versions, simply because that's how they were designed in the first place. But some of the movie edits or combination edits do work quite well, especially if you had two episodes that were relatively close on the timeline, and so you could very easily join them. And if you were wondering where this sort of concept might have originated, or if there was ever any sort of attempt to take the Young Indy concept in a more adult direction, well, what you're looking for is actually The Mata Hari Affair by James Luceno. The Mata Hari Affair was supposed to be the first in a series of books from Ballantine that were adapting the episodes from the series into... Well, it's kind of difficult to say what market they were designed for, because I don't know if they had a market in mind. With it being the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, you would think that these would be books for kids, but it's not a children's book publisher. These are Ballantine novels. They're also not marketed as young adult, and the tone is far darker and more realistic and adult than the actual episodes they're adapting. So this seems to have actually been designed as a standard series of novels. So this is really the one aspect of the Young Indy merchandising campaign that was expressly aimed at adults, but it wasn't really marketed to anyone, and the cover design, which I'll get into later, doesn't really tell you that it's a book for adults, but it is actually a book for adults. I mean, kids can read this and teenagers can read this, but it's designed to be just a standard novel, and it comes in at just over 200 pages and nicely weaves two episodes together. These are the 1916 episodes, so the book opens with the Verdun episode, so we have one of the best Young Indian World War I shows, and then it immediately transitions into the Paris 1916 episode, where Indiana Jones famously has his fling with Mata Hari, and that episode was probably the most adult or risque of the original series, because it was the one that had as much of a sex scene as you could have in a show that was on network television in the early 90s aimed at kids. Actually, several of them, and they got Nicholas Roeg to direct it, so of course it was going to be as out there as they could really push the envelope. So I think these were perfect episodes to choose for a more adult adaptation, and getting to do them in book form means you get to expand upon certain things and flesh out the plots a bit. And that is, I think, underlining the inherent issue with the edutainment approach of the Young Indy series, and that the narratives always suffered from having to cram in as much exposition and historical information, and the extreme coincidences of Indiana Jones meeting every single historical figure within a 50-mile radius at the time, or being in the right place at the right time to witness as many notable events in history as the development team could theoretically get him into. So there are quirks of the series you do have to get used to, and it is an acquired taste for everyone. But looking at the Mata Hari Affair as a book, this does as much as it can, I think, to address the edutainment approach problem. You still get that flavor, though, because James Luceno does include a great deal of historical information and research that he did. So at times, the book can be a little bit heavy on the mundane aspects, or the daily activities of how people lived in 1916 during the war, and also the elements of trench warfare. But all of this does contribute into building the atmosphere of the story. I assume this was one of the directives that he probably had writing this book, to include as much historical background as possible to continue the edutainment idea. So there are some points where I think the book might feel a little bit dry, or like you're reading a history textbook. It's not enough to ruin or mar the reading experience, but it does make a few sections here and there drag a little bit. But I think that was really just coming from the directives that he might have been given in doing this project. And of course, the opening war section and in the trenches is actually not as gripping or interesting as the second half with Young Indy and Mata Hari and their fun times together while he's on leave. Also, the first half is actually shorter. This book, again, is about 210 some odd pages, and the Verdun sequence is only about 85 pages. So the majority of the book is actually the Paris episode adaptation. The two episodes are easily bridged together because on the timeline, I think they're only separated by a month. So the bridge between the two episodes in the book is Indy simply getting assigned leave to go to Paris with Remy, as we see in the opening of the Paris episode. So it's very easy for the book to directly connect the two episodes that were otherwise completely separate. What sets this book apart is the level of detail we get in the characterizations and the plotting. Basically, the plots of both episodes are opened up and are relaxed a little bit in their pacing because they're not crammed into hour or less TV slots. And so we get more layers of characterization, we get a few additional scenes and sequences here and there, or certain scenes from the episodes or the teleplay scripts are expanded a little bit, or there's some extra dialogue. And especially important is we get internal monologues and we get to actually understand what the characters are thinking directly. We get Indiana Jones with internal monologues, so we get more of the churning emotions that are coursing through him in the war. But we also, at times, get the internal monologues of other characters. And this is most important in the Paris section because we get Mata Hari's internal dialogue, and we get immediately introduced to her knowing exactly what she's doing and playing all sides against one another and developing an actual attachment to this young boy that she's picked up. And she has ulterior motives that are much more clearly established in the book in comparison to how they're done in the episode. And since the book also has additional moments peppered throughout or scenes that run longer with added details, all of this furthers the characterizations, and this goes for the side characters as well, and the world building and the atmosphere. And so when you get to the end, the impact is far greater. So I would say that these aren't just adaptations of these stories or these scripts. I think they're the full realization of these two scripts. Basically, every aspect that was good about the source material was refined and enhanced. So even if you know the episodes like the back of your hand, the book version is essentially the fully realized version of each. And this is especially true of the Paris episode. One thing this book does is make it abundantly clear that Indiana Jones is in adult situations. He is in war, and he is having his first fling. So the things they couldn't say or do in the TV series, the book has no problem doing. And it makes it absolutely crystal clear that Indiana Jones is apparently still a virgin at this point and essentially does lose his virginity with Mata Hari, and then they continue their affair, and when he meets up with Remy later, it is clearly said that they're in a bordello and they're hanging out with prostitutes and everything. So what is merely alluded to in the television series, because they were already pushing the boundaries as much as they could with broadcast standards and practices, and it supposedly being a kid's show. The book doesn't have those constraints. So we have more graphic details about trench warfare. We have more details about the men being killed and Indy being haunted by what he has seen in war. In terms of more details of graphically describing men in great pain or dying horribly, or the aftermath of explosions or gunshots. Not enough to be ultra gory or anything, but obviously far more than they could do in a 1990s television series, again, aimed at kids. But you really get it in the Paris sequence, where Indy even worries about not being able to be up to the task in hand, and finding out that he's more than fully capable. Luceno does show taste in handling the sex scenes, of course, but they are very much explicit. You know, it's very clear that Indy loses his virginity and actually develops some feelings for Mata Hari, but what makes it so much better than the television episode is we get her internal monologue. We get more details about this characterization of the famous historical figure, and we get more about the agents that are following her around and questioning Indy, and we get additional scenes, particularly in the middle of this part of the book compared to what we see in the original teleplay or the script of the episode. So there are a number of additional scenes that do enhance the drama, and I think the book's greatest strength is that it's able to go into these more adult areas and have the time and be able to create this extra detail to allow the stories to breathe more and be much more effective, because their effectiveness was always, I think, compromised by the constraints of what the TV series aimed for and having to cram everything down into single episodes. Those are really the book's strengths, and that's what makes it unique. Otherwise, it's essentially the same story that you've seen in the television episodes, but you get the unique aspects of drawing them out and expanding them and adding in more historical details. But what's crucial is that the book is adding all of this expanded character detail and additional set pieces and little moments to further detail the story that's being told. So it's a richer experience. It kind of feels like the episode you wish you had gotten the first time, or the episode you wish they had been able to make. So if you ever wondered how did they go so far with the Mata Hari episode in the series, well, the book goes even further. So if you're a fan of the Young Indy series, this is definitely a must-read. If you're a fan of the Indiana Jones character, but you're not necessarily a fan of the approach of the Chronicles TV series, I still think this is a good read, as you'll get a lot of character insight. Whether you consider this part of your own personal headcanon is up to you, but I think even on its own as a historical novel, it's actually quite good. The only issues, I would say, are, again, there are points where the historical details do kind of make the narrative stop for a bit. So there is a little bit of expository feeling that is a bit dry here and there. You'll be reading along and you get to a point where there's a bunch of little descriptions or a couple paragraphs talking about the building or the location or what spermicide Mata Hari uses, or little details like that kind of stop the narrative, and you kind of wonder, okay, did I really need to know that, or was this Lucasfilm saying be sure and cram in as much research as you can? I kind of think it was a bit of the latter. Some of it's good, and all of it contributes to the historical period setting. But if this had been the author just writing their own novelization from scratch and not having any official involvement, I'm sure the final result might have been a little bit different in this area. And then the other factor is that in spite of all the wonderful new additional material and character introspection and additional texture, it's still the same episode stories from the TV series at their core. So at the end of the day, this is still just a novelization of 2 episodes. And I guess you could say that, one is about 85 pages, one is about 120 pages. So you could imagine, had this series continued, each episode would have been around 100 pages, give or take a few, and it would be 2 combined in a book. And so this may have been where they got the idea to start combining 2 episodes into one longer, extended single story and trying to join them somehow. In terms of the overall design, cover, and artwork, this is, again, kind of straddling the fence between is it a kid's book, is it a young adult book, is it a book for teenagers, or is it an adult novel? And the overall design is not only a little bit uninspired, it looks more like a young adult or kids book. That's what I think is really confusing about this. You've got an appropriate image of Sean Patrick Flannery from the Verdun episode, so that's good. And you've got a special Young Indy Chronicles banner on the top that I assume was supposed to be uniform for the whole series. But then the title crammed on there in blue, the cover looks more like a 1990s young adult book. It doesn't look like a standalone adult novel. Then we have the matching spine and the matching rear cover. The episodes are separated into 2 parts with a matching historical quote. And then that's it. The book is 215 pages, with the Paris sequence being the part that's obviously got more focus as it's more detailed. It's the section that's over 100 pages, and there is far more character development for Young Indy. And the cover says Book 1, which indicates this was supposed to be the first in a whole series of books adapting the television episodes. So it is unknown why they didn't continue, because this is a very well done novelization. I can only assume this didn't sell very well, and the TV series was not doing very well in the ratings, and then had various issues, and then basically kind of disappeared from sight. The whole merchandising campaign that was attempted kind of had a big splash at first in all the different areas, and then slowly disappeared rather quickly. I think really the comics were what lasted longest. So unfortunately, there was never another book in this series, and I think that's a shame, because this is really well done, and if you're interested in the Young Indiana Jones episodes, or if you're a fan of the TV show, this is, I think, the best realization of any of the episodes, because it is significantly better than the two episodes it's based on. It adds a great amount of historical detail that isn't in the episodes. It gives you more texture, more world building, greater sense of atmosphere, and most of all, it allows the stories to breathe and be more detailed, while also giving a much greater sense of character development, especially for Young Indy himself. And so you're able to get a lot more out of these stories that were originally just standalone TV episodes. In terms of Young Indiana Jones overall, I still think that, even including the Chronicles TV series as it is, I still think the Random House series is what nailed the concept of Young Indiana Jones, and I think that book series, even though it was technically aimed at younger readers, I think that manages to blend the educational historical aspects and the pulp adventure aspects far better than the Chronicles TV series or any of the spinoffs and offshoots ever did, because the edutainment concept wasn't, basically forced down the viewer's throat with the Random House books. And they also predated it and were not done by Lucasfilm specifically. But I think the Mata Hari Affair as a novel is the most adult storytelling for a younger Indiana Jones that we've ever seen. I think it is much more fully realized than the already very good TV episodes it's adapting, and they're very well joined together. It doesn't feel like you're just going into a completely separate story. The Verdun section flows perfectly into the Paris section without any problems, even when you know that they were originally two different episodes in the show. If you're looking at the material in the novel compared to the show, I think the best description would be the original episodes are, they're the PG or PG-13 version, whereas the versions in the novel are much more the harder PG-13 rated, or even the R-rated adult versions. Not because they have tons of descriptions in the sex scenes and the gore of the war scenes, but because the tone and the detail is obviously there for adults as opposed to a kids audience. So I think it's important for all indie fans to try the Mata Hari Affair, and thankfully, even though it's an obscure series that never took off, and so there's only one book, it's not a super expensive book to track down. You can usually find it on the used market for around $10, give or take, depending on condition and what the sellers are looking to charge. And every once in a while you can find some of these more obscure young indie books in used bookstores, but with this book in particular, I don't know where exactly they would put it. I managed to find this copy in a bookstore, but I found it buried in the children's section. It wasn't in the young adult section. It wasn't in the spot where they put other series or licensed books, and it wasn't in the standard adult fiction section where they would put licensed books. I managed to find it in a stack of assorted children's books, because that's kind of what it looks like, and it's a smaller paperback size. So if you're looking for these young indie books, books, or this book in particular, you might have to look around because nobody seems to know how to classify it. As always, I hope my babblings about the world of our favorite archaeologist and the expanded universe of indie fiction has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you're at all a fan of the Young Indy Chronicles and you haven't read this book, it's an absolute must. But even if you're just a regular indie fan who's never really gotten into the Chronicles series, I still think this is a great read and full of character insight. And again, it's not terribly expensive. You just have to go to the trouble of actually tracking down the original paperback release. Please do keep supporting your local independent bookstores by hopefully being able to add some lovely indie editions to your collection. Keep reading, keep cracking the whip, and thank you ever so much for watching.